This is a battle for the planet, and this brood of vipers, if you will, has set up its nest within the bowels of the so-called United States government and the so-called United States military and the associated alphabet soup agencies.
Hey friends, thanks so much for joining us. You know how much we do appreciate it. I should say one thing before we start with Dr. Richard Sauter. I think you've probably discovered about my YouTube channel over time here that I don't post on a daily basis just to post. A lot of folks get out there and they'll read you an article. You can read the articles yourself. I care about my audience and I respect you enough to always put up really good content. And if that means one interview every 2 or 3 days or a micro documentary now and then, that's just how I think it should be. And today we have Dr. Richard Sauter. You may know him from his website, eventhorizon.blogspot.com, and his wonderful books about underground bases, the first of which is called Underground Bases and Tunnels, What is the Government Trying to Hide? And the second book, Underwater and Underground Bases, and the third, Hidden in Plain Sight, Beyond the X-Files. It's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Richard Sauter, direct from Ecuador. Richard, how are you?
Well, I'm great, thank you, and I appreciate you having me on.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. This has always been a topic of interest to me. It's not really part of the core of what we cover here at SGT Report, but then again, it kind of is as it relates to the New World Order, what is going on with the deep state, the breakaway civilization. We do touch on those aspects of it, the trillions of dollars missing from the Pentagon, and I think your work is very, very interesting and in many ways inspirational, as you believe, as I do, that spiritual warfare is alive and well on planet Earth. And I think that the Gotthard Tunnel opening ceremony in Switzerland kind of brings both of these concepts together. Technology, deep underground bases, and spiritual warfare. Where would you like to begin this intensely interesting discussion?
Well, we could plunge into it at any point. There's so many threads that you could tug on to start unraveling this demonic tapestry that has been elaborately woven over a period of not just centuries, but millennia. They say follow the money. So why don't we start with the money? Yeah. You alluded to the trillions. If the public reports, the public reports in the mainstream news media can be believed, the Inspector General of the Pentagon recently admitted that some $6.5 trillion worth of the Pentagon's budget over the last decade and a half or so cannot be adequately accounted for. In other words, trillions of dollars going to the Pentagon. And by the way, I believe the real figure quite possibly is greater, perhaps much greater. It's impossible to know at the end of the day with any accuracy how much money the Pentagon has and what they're doing with it. What we do know is that from time to time in the last 15 or 20 years they have said, gee, we cannot track X number of trillions of dollars.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
Now, the IRS will rigorously demand that every Tom, Dick, and Jerry account for every last nickel to them. And yet here comes the Pentagon saying, not that it can't account for every last nickel, or every last dime, or every last dollar, but for multiple trillions of dollars, cannot say what it's done with it. They don't have an audit trail. There are thousands of accounts that just vanish from their systems.
Right.
Thousands. Now, I want to mention a book that Fletcher Prouty wrote decades ago, about 1980 or so, entitled The Secret Team. Did you ever read that book?
No, but I'm familiar with Fletcher Prouty.
You can get that book from Amazon. I think it's been reprinted. Fletcher Prouty, during the height of the Cold War, was the liaison officer back in the 50s, 60s, and up into the early 70s, I believe, between the United States military and the CIA. He also played a very high-level role in Project Paperclip, which brought so many of the Nazi technicians, scientists, and engineers to the United States in the years and decades following World War II. I talked with Fletcher when I was doing my research about almost 20 years ago, and I asked him a series of questions, including about the one of the underground installations in Northern Virginia that I had identified in my research, the Warrenton. In Warrenton, Virginia, not too far from Washington, D.C., the United States Army had some training stations, A and B, and I believe there was also a station C and D. And I asked him about those because my research indicated that, in fact, they were not United States Army facilities, but CIA underground facilities operating under nominal cover of the United States Army. So I asked him about that, and he said, yeah, there is an underground facility there, but I can't tell you anything about it because it is special access. Now, that gets to the heart of what he talks about in his Secret Team book, The Secret Team. I think the subtitle is The CIA and Its Allies in Control of the World, something like that. But the main title is The Secret Team. And what he reveals in that book is that, as of decades ago, that the Pentagon was riddled with literally hundreds of CIA cutout operations. In other words, within the formal organizational structure of the Pentagon, the CIA was running programs using its own personnel and who may have been in military uniforms, Coast Guard, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Army, but they in fact answered to the CIA. And there were hundreds of these. They would be covert or clandestine programs. What this means is that when you look at the formal command structure of the Pentagon, you would have had admirals and generals and colonels, etc., with units under them, but not answering to them, using money and equipment, material of various kinds, shuttling weapons around, raw resources, equipment, man, money. And the generals and admirals wouldn't know anything about this because the operations would not report to them. Mm-hmm. So I think this explains a lot of this business of the inspectors general of the Pentagon saying, yeah, we've had X number of trillions of dollars flowing through our accounts, but you know what? We can't really tell you with any specificity what we've done with it. It's all wildly out of control, massively out of control. Now, I believe the CIA and also agencies such as the NSA are even more integrated into the Pentagon now than they were 30 or 40 years ago. And so this gets around directly to the theme of many themes, including the underground and underwater bases and tunnels, many of which are unknown. Some of them are known, and I discuss many of the known ones in my series of 3 books. However, neither I nor anyone else can totally document all of these facilities, not even people who have need-to-know top-secret clearances, and here's why. If you are on the inside of one of these compartmentalized projects, you know about what's going on in the project for which you have a need to know. Mm-hmm. But because these projects are compartmentalized and hermetically sealed, you won't know about other projects. Right. Because you don't have a need to know. And those who do have a need to know will not tell you, even if you ask. In fact, they will flag you and may single you out for special attention. So people, when they get into this world of special operations, or as Fletcher Prouty told me, well, that gets into the area of special access, and I can't tell you about that. and bang, the door goes shut. The most you'll get these people, and I've talked to a number of people like Fletcher over the years, the most you'll get them to acknowledge, if you're lucky, is that, yeah, there's a base there, or yeah, that's a CIA program, but I can't tell you anymore. And that's it.
Right.
That's the way it works, if they tell you that much.
Right.
And so what we have here is, there's another book which I would recommend to you and your listeners, The Silent War by John Pena Craven. John Pena Craven was a character somewhat like, now dead, both Fletcher Prouty and John Pena Craven are dead. John Pena Craven was a World War II Navy veteran. He served on active duty in World War II. And then after the war, he went and got a PhD in oceanography and went into the Navy as a civilian, not a uniformed officer anymore, but as a civilian. However, he rose to the ranks to a very high level in the Navy, and was put in charge of the Navy's deep underwater engineering project during the height of the Cold War, like Fletcher Prouty also served at a very high level in the military at the height of the Cold War. I don't know if these two men knew each other, but they very well may have. Now, John Pena Craven was tasked by the Navy with developing the capability to work very deeply undersea, down to 20,000 feet depths, which is very nearly 4 miles down. Those are crushing. The pressure is crushing when you get down there. He was also tasked with developing the capability to send manned operators, thousands of feet undersea, to do whatever the Navy needed doing. Now, he was the father of the DSRVs, the Deep Submergence Rescue Vehicles. I discussed them in my books, my last two books. We don't know how deeply they went, but they were designed to go very deeply. John Pena Craven, in his book, The Silent War, leaves so many tantalizing breadcrumbs and clues. He's like all the rest of these sphinxes who have so many secrets to tell, and who want to tell many of them, but who are bound by their security oaths. What he did say, nevertheless, is the DSRVs had many special, unusual capabilities, which he, however, could not discuss or reveal. He did say, however, that they were more complex in their way than the space shuttle, which was a very complex machine indeed. And so what he's telling us is that these deep submergence rescue vehicles, which were intended to go down and rescue the crews from sunken submarines at very great depths, clamp onto the hatches, and bring out the crews when submarines went down. Now, whether or not the DSRVs ever did that, I don't think we would know. But that's what they theoretically were designed for. And, this business of saying they had technological capabilities that exceeded even those of the space shuttle, but he couldn't say more about their specific mission and what they really did, is very puzzling. I'm guessing the DSRVs had some exotic technology incorporated into them, and that they may have been transfer vessels for crews between undersea bases. Mm-hmm. Because in my research, I ran across documentation that beginning in 1966, this is what the public record states, the Navy had United States Navy had a research and design program at the China Lake Naval Weapons Station out in the desert in California. And the facility is still there. They do a lot of cutting-edge R&D work for the United States Navy in all kinds of technological areas. But there was a group established there, a working group, to work on researching and designing manned deep undersea bases capable of accommodating multiple large military submarines at a time. I discussed this in my second and third book, and the designs that I saw were drawn up to accommodate two, three, four, five, six large military submarines at a time and their crews. The idea is that they would go into massive deep undersea airlocks. You think about how huge these would have to be. A large military submarine from the top of the conning tower to the keel can be upwards of 100 feet. And then from stem to stern can be
500-600 feet.
Exactly. So you're talking about massive airlocks, hundreds or even thousands of feet undersea. It's quite a feat of marine engineering, and based on what I have read and been told, my best guess is that has been done.
Well, let me jump in here, because I think I would like to just say a couple of things, because I'm taking in everything you're saying, and people are probably wondering why I haven't jumped in with a question yet. And the reason is this is such a gigantic topic, and my mind is just spinning, because you mentioned the U.S. Navy's role in this as it pertains to deep sea bases that potentially may be out there. We started the conversation talking about the breakaway civilization, the trillions of dollars missing. I'm sure you're well aware that Gary McKinnon, that famed hacker who got access to some NASA documents, reportedly saw a document that said non-terrestrial officers of the U.S. Navy.
That's right.
We wonder if this deep state is going off planet as well as going below planet. And I think that as it pertains to underground military bases, the average American would say, well, of course, we know about the NORAD base in Cheyenne Mountain. It makes perfect sense. This is all part of continuity of government. We need to have an operable government should we ever be attacked by the Russians with a nuclear weapon, etc. But guess what, guys? It goes so much deeper than that. And as I started the conversation, I mentioned spiritual warfare. What's another great example of where these underground bases and the technology to create these underground bases meets spirituality? CERN's Symmetry movie. CERN was developed right out in the open, really publicly, and nobody knew about it. And CERN, the tunnel in which the most elaborate, complex machine ever built that we know about sits, the tunnel is between 150 and 575 feet deep, almost 2 football fields deep, and it's massive. The technology exists to create elaborate underground cities. And Richard, I think your thesis is that the deep state has done just that.
Well, yes, and for those who say that, well, we need to protect our government. Why? Your government is stealing from you. This so-called government that you need to protect is stealing trillions of dollars from you under cover of law, saying you must pay the taxes, and turns right around and says, but you know what? We can't tell you what we've done with it. Right. Why? Why must you have an organization that steals from you multiple trillions of dollars and then tells you that it can't tell you what it's done with that money? Why must you have that organization in your life? Why must you take direction from thieves and liars? Why? Why are you morally or legally bound to accept theft from your person and lies to your face? Please answer me that.
Yeah, and I should say this. You and I are both concerned about the fact that there's ulterior motives here with this deep state, this breakaway civilization, the government, right? The deep state
the
of this government.
ulterior motive is to steal from you, to lie from you, and then to penalize you or imprison you when you complain that, hey, you're stealing from me, you're lying from me, you're nothing but a den of thieves. That's the ulterior motive. Jesus Christ spoke about the brood of vipers a couple of thousand years ago, and it's gotten so much worse since then. This is a battle for the planet, and this brood of vipers, if you will, has set up its nest within the bowels of the so-called United States government and the so-called United States military and the associated alphabet soup agencies.
Mm-hmm.
They're evil. They're thoroughly evil, and I'm not ashamed to say so.
Well, I want to support you and say this. We see Hillary Clinton and those in power continue to lie about Russia and point fingers at Russia and Putin as being the evil force in Syria when we know it's this government, we know it's these intelligence agencies that are arming and supporting ISIS terror to topple Assad. This government is being accused of striking convoys and blaming those strikes on Putin. This government continues to push us towards World War III. And I think as it pertains to spiritual warfare and ulterior motives, my question would be, why? They must surely know that World War III would end badly for we the people, and yet they continue to push towards World War III. And their failsafe is to escape to these underground bases, evidently, because they don't seem to care.
Or off the planet.
Or off planet.
We're dealing with a demonic dynamic here, a demonic reality. We are dealing with something so deeply evil and foul that the average person is not able to wrap his or her mind around it. It is beyond vile. That's almost another program, but that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with evil so foul that it's hard to grasp it, to grok it, to come to terms with it, that you and I and everyone else have been subjected to this demonic rule called the United States of America. And I'm suggesting that this goes back to the founding of the so-called Republic of the United States. It was then and is now a demonic project intended to spread and contaminate this planet with its violence and its lies, because as you go back to the history of this thing called the United States of America, forget the propaganda that people are taught in school. Look at it. War after war after war after war. Slavery, slaughter of Native Americans, theft of their land and resources. And then half of Mexico is now the United States. The United States waged a war of aggression against Mexico in the 1840s and took half of Mexico. And yet, time and time again, the United States government and its agencies and its spokespersons present the United States as somehow a uniquely good force for justice and freedom and liberty in the world, when nothing could be further from the truth. Time and time again, the United States is an aggressor. It goes into countries and kills not thousands, but millions of people, again and again and again, over a very long period of time, all the while proclaiming itself to be not just a good country, but the best country in the world ever. And when you actually look at the situation objectively, you see that it is 180 degrees the polar opposite of that. So I suggest to you, we're dealing with the most foul sort of evil that you could ever imagine. And for the life of me, I do not know why, for years and years, so-called Christians in the United States have been playing ball, if you will, with this government and sending their children abroad to slaughter other people by the millions. And then their children come home and they're received with open arms. And it's said that they served the country. What service is it to go on the other side of the world and slaughter people?
Yeah, most of the folks that send their sons and daughters into those wars really don't know any better because they've drank the Kool-Aid since birth, and they haven't done any of the research necessary to wake up to the fact that the Federal Reserve is a private organization answerable to no one, maybe other than the City of London bankers and the House of Rothschild. These people don't understand the power behind the throne. And
well, let me tell you, you raised a point about the Federal Reserve.
Mm-hmm.
If you dig into the United States Code, as I have, and I've blogged about this. If people want to go back through my previous blog posts, there's years of them. But you know what? Most of my blog posts stand alone and to this day are worth reading, because what I discovered is that the Federal Reserve pays no taxes except for a nominal real estate tax on its real property. Beyond that, all of the trillions of dollars, unknown trillions of dollars, that it creates out of thin air, it pays no tax on that. No tax on the profit that it derives from creating the unknown numbers of trillions of dollars out of thin air.
Well, nor does it have to be accountable for its books. You know, we just saw the recent presidential debate.
No, there's never any accounting.
No, I know, and everybody's asking to see Trump's tax returns. Fine, let's see what's going on at the Clinton Foundation. How about let's see that? How about let's see that paperwork? And you know what? As far as the federal,
I don't know why he didn't raise that issue in the debate.
I don't either. It was very disappointing because what he should have said is he should have said, "I was recently approached by the former president of the Senate of Haiti, who is demanding that the Clinton Foundation records of all the monies being donated to the Clinton Foundation on behalf of Haitian people, all of which has gone missing. We need to see those documents."
In 2010, the earthquake of Haiti, not only American taxpayers, but the whole world has given billions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation for the Haitians. Not even 2% of that money went back to Haiti. So, Mr. Trump, we are asking you, begging you, the Haitian community will side with you if one day you ask Hillary Clinton publicly to disclose the audit of all the money they have stolen from Haiti in 2010 after the earthquake.
And he needed to say that in the debate, and he didn't do it. And I think it's because of a woeful lack of coaching. He spent the last 2 weeks campaigning, as opposed to she, who was, who knows where she was for the last 2 weeks. She was obviously preparing for the debate. And hopefully in the next debate he'll get his act together, because there were some very fundamental things he needed to keep reminding the American people about. Most people don't know that she's a hardcore criminal, part of the deep state, and that she committed perjury to Congress over her emails, her private email server, and some 30,000 emails which were never turned over, many of which were classified, which she denies. She's a hardcore criminal, and she represents the deep state. She represents what we're talking about. She's friends with Rothschild. She benefited from $100,000 per head fundraisers from House of Rothschild. She is beholden to these bankers in the city of London. And you said in a recent interview with Richie Allen, I want to quote this, it's very powerful, "The machine that's taking down this planet through its false, seductive, illusory reality is spawning right now. We've been scammed. We have been lured with the false promise of everything whilst stripping us of our humanity." And these are the people who built CERN. These are the people that have deep underground bases. Let's talk about some of those. What comes to mind when you think of Yucca Mountain? What comes to mind when you think of the Denver airport and all of the occult imagery we see at the Denver airport? What comes to mind when you think of these deep underground bases, Area 51, things that are not public, but which you have spent time studying?
Well, it's massive. That's what comes to mind. When I first got into this research, I had written a short little article for UFO magazine published out of Los Angeles at that time by Vicki Cooper and Don Ecker. And in the article, I had said that through my research, I could document a certain number of underground facilities, some of which were quite large and sophisticated, among them the Mount Weather facility operated by FEMA in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Northern Virginia, the so-called Site R, or Fort Ritchie alternate Pentagon Underground Command Center, right on the smack dab on the border between Maryland and Pennsylvania, and of course the Cheyenne Mountain Center, operated at that time by NORAD in Colorado, and that there were likely others, but those were some of the main ones that I could identify. And all of these are quite large, can accommodate hundreds or even a couple thousand people at a time, and in button-up status can button up for a month or more, maybe even years. And I published that article. At that point, I felt like I had exhausted the topic of underground bases. I had no idea of the extent of this thing. Well, about 6 weeks after I published that article, which came out, I think, in early November 1992, thereabouts. I was deeply asleep the last week of 1992. In the early morning, I was suddenly awakened, and I was in a state where I was wide awake, very mentally clear, but my body was very physically relaxed and asleep. I was physically asleep, but mentally awake. It's a little bit of an unusual uh, state of awareness or being to find yourself in, but that was the case. So my apartment was very quiet. I was wondering, why did I suddenly awake? I didn't have to wait long. In a matter of seconds, I heard a voice speaking in my ear, just in one ear, in my inner ear. It was like, I don't know your age, but I'm 61, and when I was a kid back in the 60s, it was very, very much your age to have these small little transistor radios with a plastic earplug that you would put in your ear, in one ear, and listen to it. It was the forerunner of the earbuds that everyone runs around with today. And so it was like that, like having one of those little earplugs in your ear listening to the ball game on a small transistor radio. So the voice that spoke to me was that of an educated Caucasian male speaking normally accented late 20th century North American English. He started by saying to me, very matter-of-factly, the underground bases are real. That was his opening line. Well, he had my attention. And I want to add here that from the first instant, I always understood then and now that a real flesh and blood man was speaking to me using some kind of voice to brain or voice to inner ear transmitter. That there was no magic involved, that I wasn't hearing the voice of an angel or a demon or Jesus or God or an extraterrestrial, but of a real flesh and blood man.
Now, this was in what, 1992?
92.
Yeah. Well, and we know that technology exists now. No one probably
It did then.
You believe it did then as well? Okay.
And I have another book called Kundalini Tales. It's out of print now. If people want to buy it, they can, but I receive no royalties from it. You could also get it from interlibrary loan if you're in the United States. In Kundalini Tales, in the appendix, I reproduced a suite of mind control patents, psychotronic technology. Already, I think is in the late 70s or something like that, there were patents appearing in the literature, open literature, for microwave transmitters to transmit directly to the auditory cortex, to transmit intelligible sound. So if that appeared in the open literature in the 1970s, I'm guessing they had that in the 40s and 50s. And whoever talked to me used that technology or an associated or related technology. On the inside of these programs, compartmentalized programs and projects, there's a lot of spiffy Buck Rogers technology that we don't have in the civilian world, but they do, and they use it. Anyway, he went on to say that there was just huge projects and programs going on underground, and that the average person had no clue, but if they did know about it, they would be amazed and astonished. But in fact, because they don't know, what they don't know is out of sight and therefore out of mind, and they don't give it one thought. As he was talking, and he just talked to me in that way for 2 or 3 minutes, I was thinking, holy moly, because what he was describing was so huge, big facilities, lots of people working down there, lots of money, cutting edge technology that we don't know about in the civilian sector topside. We just don't have it. And then he just stopped talking. he gave me this data dump as if to say, hey, guy, you know that little article you wrote in UFO magazine? You're just scratching the surface. It's so much bigger than you suspect. So
Well, can I jump in?
I was, yes, sir.
Well, I don't want to interrupt, so you can circle back to that if you want. Well, let me jump in and support some of what you're saying, because it sounds a little woo-woo to say that you heard this voice come to you. We know they have the technology. They probably had it then. But I want to support what you're saying as it pertains to the monies that have disappeared and the breakaway civilization, because two people of intellect who I follow closely and admire their work are Joseph P. Farrell and Catherine Austin Fitts, who talk specifically about what we're talking about here, the missing trillions and what Catherine Austin Fitts describes as the breakaway civilization. It appears that there is a small group that has technology that supersedes anything that human beings have at their fingertips today, anything released publicly, that perhaps they have reverse engineered alien technology, UFOs, etc. And many of the devices, many of the UFOs that people see today may well be of terrestrial origin. But the technology is so fantastical that we simply immediately attach a alien life form to those vehicles. How many of the vehicles that you think people see, how many of the quote-unquote UFOs, and that's all they are, is they're unidentified. They're flying objects. We just don't know what they are, who they belong to. How many of the UFO sightings that people see, as so many of the YouTube channels out there like Secure Team and others are really showing wonderful UFO footage these days. How many of those vehicles do you think are of terrestrial origin? Certainly some of them.
Well, I agree. It may be a lot of them. One of the other things I've looked at, well, I've looked into many things over the years. I've researched a lot of different policy areas. One of the things that I can tell you is that, and I have a blog post about this actually, it has to do with exactly this, a secret space program. Mm-hmm. I entitled it The USSA's Secret Space Program, and then an S in parentheses, because I believe there are multiple programs. You have to realize that this goes back at least to the 1950s, and I'm guessing the United States secret space programs began in the late 40s or early 50s. I mean, actually sending manned devices into space, into orbit, or even further afield. Let me give you what's known on the public record.
Well, and I will say, too, because I forgot to mention, and I meant to during that last blurb I shared, Lockheed Skunk Works' Ben Rich famously is reported to have said, we have the technology to take ET home. Anything you can imagine, we can already do. We have the technology to travel to the stars, and that was better than 10 years ago. So,
I think that was about 15 years ago or more. I suspect, and he was saying that openly then, translation, they had that capability probably for decades before that.
Right. Well, imagine how much technology has advanced just in the past 20 years. My God, they supposedly sent men to the moon with the Apollo rockets. I mean, give me a break. The computers needed to do any of that computing, all of which the records have conveniently vanished from NASA. They're not going to give you any of the telemetry data, all of the records of the videotape of them on the moon. It's all disappeared, which is very convenient. But let's assume they did go to the moon with that technology. All of the technology it took to do that, it fits in your pocket in the form of a smartphone, a smart device. And who knows what they've got that they're not telling us about, Richard.
Well, there are a couple of threads here I want to tug on. To begin with, the United States Air Force's Project Dinosaur program back in the 50s and extending up into the 1960s was to be the United States Air Force's space shuttle program. The technology came from the plans that General Walter Dornberger, brought over with him. Dornberger was the commanding officer of Werner von Braun at Peenemünde during the Nazi period and produced the V1 and the V2. They worked very closely together. Project Paperclip brought both of those men over to the United States and seeded them both into the military-industrial complex, along with unknown numbers of other Nazi military officers, engineers, technicians, and scientists. But they were two of the big names. Dornberger, when he came over, brought the plans for the Nazis had plans for a space shuttle. They were going to put up an orbital space plane already in the 30s and 40s. This goes back to the Sangers, Eugen Sanger and his wife Irene, who were world-class aerospace engineers back in the 1930s, developed plans for this. They were German scientists and engineers. And this was taken over by Dornberger and his team. The Nazis back in the 40s were developing plans to put men into space. And if they had won the war, probably would have done that before NASA ultimately did it, and the Russians, using rocket technology, that is. Now, chemical rockets. Now, Dornberger brought these plans over, which had initially been developed by the Sangers and further elaborated by his team. And the Air Force picked up on these Nazi plans and within 10 years was developing the Dinosaur program to put up United States Air Force officers into orbit. Dinosaur spelled D-Y-N-A-S-O-A-R. Now, publicly, the Air Force never flew its own astronauts using the Dinosaur technology into space. Interestingly, Neil Armstrong, supposedly the first man to step onto the moon, was an Air Force astronaut in the Dinosaur program and left the Dinosaur program, came over to NASA, and became a NASA astronaut. So that's the history, interesting history of Neil Armstrong. For whatever reason, his career did not follow the typical trajectory of most of the other early NASA astronauts exactly, although almost all of them were military officers, quite a number of them test pilots for the military.
But very, very public-facing astronauts. And if anybody wants to explore what really happened in terms of the Apollo missions, I don't think we fully know. Some believe we actually went and landed on the moon. Others think it was a very big hoax. The Van Allen radiation belts being the number one reason why we can't go there. NASA's recently said we still can't get past those Van Allen radiation belts. So how in the heck did we do it in the 60s? Watch the video of Neil Armstrong and the other two astronauts after they had supposedly just returned from the moon. And you're not going to see any three guys more depressed and sad-looking than those three. We really do wonder what happened.
Let me segue back to the secret space program here because it's important.
Okay.
The military, United States military, over a period of decades, started and stopped 4 separate manned space programs, always giving various excuses after having spent billions of dollars and trained cadres of astronauts. The military has repeatedly trained and formed its own parallel astronaut corps, parallel to those of NASA, and then shut these programs down. What I'm suggesting to you implicitly is that these were covers for the real space program,
right,
which is not NASA but operates under cover of subterfuge established by the alphabet soup agencies. NASA is a trick pony. It's show and tell to deflect attention from what's really going on behind the curtain. And the United States military plays a huge role in this. The second military open military space program was the so-called Manned Orbiting Laboratory, which was supposed to fly in the mid-1960s. The United States Air Force, after abandoning, supposedly, the Dinosaur program, came up with a Manned Orbiting Laboratory and trained astronauts whom it was going to put into orbit in its orbiting laboratory. Now, then they very publicly shut it down. They said they weren't going to do it after all. At the same time, parallel to the NASA Apollo program, the United States Army had a program called Project Horizon. This was during the 1960s. They were going to send a series, quite a long series of, I think, upwards of 300 manned space flights to the moon to establish a United States Army military base on the moon. The project was called Horizon, Project Horizon. They were just going to have a years-long series of manned missions to the moon, similar to the Apollo missions, but they would have been United States Army missions. And then they shut it down. They said they weren't going to do it after all. They were actually going to do this before the Apollo program sent men to the moon, which raises the question as to whether they did it from some isolated launching pad in the Pacific or somewhere else that no one would be able to observe.
Well, let me say one thing. Easy to do, too, because most people are not aware of the Air Force's X-37B space plane, which spent a year in orbit, completely classified, completely secret. They will not tell us what it was doing up there. They will not tell us what the mission was. And it speaks to the fact that the public-facing space programs have been dismantled because there's nothing for we the people. They're taking it all. We don't get anything. And it's all going into the deep state. Again, the Air Force, its X-37B space plane. Do you know about it? Did you hear about it when it blasted off? I mean, I'm asking the audience, guys.
Yeah.
Have you heard about it? Were there reports? Did you follow the reports of when it blasted off? No. It's all top secret. It's all classified.
That's right. And then there's a fourth one. The United States military Air Force made a puzzling announcement in the late 1980s and 1989. The Air Force publicly announced that it was shutting down previously unknown secret space program. The Air Force had set up a parallel space shuttle program to run out of Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, which has a launch facility. It's like a military version of Cape Canaveral, if you will, but it's on the Pacific coast in California. And they announced they were disbanding or decommissioning a space shuttle launch control facility and mission control facility at Vandenberg, a launch pad, and that they were disbanding a theretofore publicly unknown secret cadre of 32 military astronauts. 32. They also revealed they had spent $3.3 billion on this project, which was publicly completely unknown until the day the Air Force announced they weren't going to do it after all because it was duplicating the NASA program and blah, 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 blah. So there's an example of 4 separate United States military manned space programs that they started, they developed, they trained astronauts, they were going to do it, and then they say, but no, we're not going to do it after all, because it duplicates what NASA is doing. Do you see how the fix is in? Do you see the shell game? I'm suggesting that this was all just public relations cover to conceal what they're really doing, to deflect scrutiny from their actual activities, and that when the Pentagon then announces, well, you know what, we just looked at our books and we don't have an audit trail for $6.5 trillion. We can't account publicly for what we've done with that money. And oh, by the way, the records for thousands of programs are missing. You know, there's just these thousands and thousands of files and accounts that, gee whiz, they just vanished. I don't believe a word of it, and I'm suggesting that neither should you.
Yeah, you can't misplace $6, $7, $8 trillion.
The IRS sends people to jail over thousands of dollars, and here you have the largest agency in the United States government saying we can't account for multiple trillions of dollars, and nobody in government does diddly squat.
Well, that's right, but the Pentagon, the deep state, the apparatus controlling the Pentagon, right, is the same apparatus that controls the IRS, which is the collection arm of the Federal Reserve. So, of course, the IRS will
Which
target...
pays no taxes.
The IRS will target we the people, but it won't target the agencies. And you're right, the fix is in. And I guess just to circle back to this idea of deep underground military bases, what do you really think is going on? Because
anything you can conceive of.
I wonder,
any
let
things
me
that
ask,
you cannot conceive of.
yeah, and I wonder because, you know, we know about the Dulce base and all the UFO sightings over there in New Mexico. We know about, I mentioned Area 51. How about the far more secretive S4 facility in Nevada? There are obviously ongoing operations on a daily basis that are black budget, off-book, top secret operations that include, I believe, vehicles or technology that is extraterrestrial in its capabilities. But I guess I just want your opinion on what's really going on underground. You have these crazy stories told by Phil Schneider before he
Well,
died.
Phil, let me tell you, in the case of Phil Schneider, I talked with Phil 2 or 3 times before he died. He told me he was going to send documentation that would support his extravagant claims. He never did. So he didn't keep his word to me. And also, before he died in his talks, he falsely attributed things to me. He said publicly that I was a PhD architect. That's false. I have never had anything to do with the field of architecture in any way. I certainly have no credentials in the field. I've never practiced the profession. I've never presented that I have any of either credentials or experience as an architect in any way, shape, or form. And yet he publicly was attributing that to me. He also publicly said that I had worked on these facilities, and that's also not true. So if Phil Schneider scrambled the most fundamental elements of my own biographical details, then I think much of the rest of what he said has to be viewed with suspicion as well. I'm not sure he actually worked on these bases and projects. As he said, Phil is dead, so we cannot query him on these points. What we can say with 100% certainty is that the underground bases do exist. There are many of them. We just don't know how many. Now, as for what goes on in them, let me tell you what I would guess. Mind you that I am not on the inside, and those who are on the inside say little or nothing, because the strictures for their security clearances are very rigid and can be extremely harsh. Now, at the least, we're dealing with probably artificial intelligence down there, massive quantum supercomputers, for example, with capabilities beyond our imagining. We're dealing with cloning and genetic and biological engineering underground. I would guess, from everything I've been told, there are extraterrestrials here of various factions with various motivations, and that the United States military or certain factions in the military and other agencies, not all of which are governmental, by the way, are working with ETs underground, which may or may not be flesh and blood. Some of these ETs may be AI, artificial organisms, not biological organisms, but it's hard to wrap our minds around this. Vastly aware, vastly conscious, vastly intelligent entities that are not biological, but are artificial intelligences. But who would want to use and interface with biological entities, such as willing factions within the alphabet soup agencies, within Wall Street, within institutional religions, within governments, if you follow me. within industries, within Fortune 500 companies. You see how demonic this could get. And the orientation of these artificial entities could be very negative from a spiritual point of view.
Right. And that actually is why I brought up the Phil Schneider thing. Could part of the deep state be working with off-planet extraterrestrial biological entities? Is that possible?
Well, that would be my best guess.
Yeah,
yes.
or as many would say, and as many have argued, what these really are not off-planet extraterrestrial biological entities. They're spiritual entities. They're demonic entities. And I think
both and.
Maybe it's both, because there are definitely factions within the deep state, the City of London, the bankers, that appear to be satanic in their belief system and in who they worship. They're Luciferians, many of them. It's documented. So we do wonder, how far does this trickle into the deep state? You know, how much of this is spiritual warfare, as I mentioned at the beginning?
A lot of it.
Yeah.
And I won't just say that many of them appear to be satanic. I will flat out say that many of them are satanic. Mm-hmm. They do not mean well. They are in the service of great evil. And how else to explain the ongoing... This planet is being taken down. The biosphere on this planet is being taken down. There is now underway on Earth a vast extinction of biological life forms across the gamut. It spans the spectrum from, very small life forms, the plankton in the ocean, for example, all the way up to human beings, elephants, large mature trees. The great forests are being destroyed. More and more species of life are going extinct. The bees are disappearing. Butterflies are disappearing. Frogs and turtles, more and more, are disappearing. The plankton, the phytoplankton in the sea, are disappearing. In the Pacific alone, there's massive mortality of plankton due to the radiation entering the ocean from Fukushima. Now that matters because something like 40% of the oxygen on this planet is produced by phytoplankton in the world's seas. So when you have a massive mortality event for the phytoplankton in the Pacific Ocean, which is the largest ocean on this planet, that hits us at a real basic level because we are oxygen breathers. So you can see that there is a multifaceted operation underway on this planet to knock out, to KO, to kill the biosphere.
Right.
And you see it happening in many ways, on many levels, in virtually every region of the planet. And if you focus on each element individually, you can lose sight of the big picture, which is that this is in fact globally coordinated, and it's vicious.
Well, we've spoken on many occasions with Dane Wigington of Geoengineering Watch, and he could support everything you're saying. It's the complete destruction of the biosphere, and if it isn't reversed, and reversed immediately, it will spell the doom of humanity. And boy, I wanted this to be sort of a fun, uplifting conversation, and here we're both coming to the same conclusion, which is that there is a demonic entity that is steering humanity in a very, very dark and almost irreversible direction, if not for the power of divine intervention, which I do think to some degree we are seeing. And it is what we need to pray for. It's what we need to hope for and pray for, is divine intervention. Let the light of truth shine on this demonic deep state. And it's the light of truth that can save us.
I agree with that. And elevating the level of consciousness and awareness of the average human being, not of a few highly informed individuals, but of the average human being, of the race at large. That's salvation of humanity, because if we don't elevate our level of awareness, then we're done for. Frankly, we are toast. We don't have a lot of time. We don't have the luxury of time. And while I certainly believe in a universal creative intelligence or force that we frankly cannot understand with our limited intelligence, I also believe that look around our solar system at the number of dead planets. I think, this is my belief based on the sum total of my reading and study, is that in the past, planets such as Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the Moon had biological life and congenial conditions conducive to biological life, and that in the past there was a planet between Mars and Jupiter that exploded, that in fact this solar system is being taken down one planet at a time. Mercury is already uninhabitable. Venus is uninhabitable. Mars is uninhabitable. There is an exploded planet between Mars and Jupiter. This planet is in the process of being rendered uninhabitable. Do you see what I'm saying? That this solar system is being taken down one planet at a time by a force, by an intelligence, by an awareness for whom time is not such a major factor. Victory is. And victory for it consists in taking out one planet after another. I submit that we are seeing a mighty, very malevolent war engine or war machine at work if you have the eyes to see it. And it is sophisticated, subtle, cunning, powerful. It operates in the physical realm, in the spiritual realm, in the emotional and psychological realm. It is patient beyond all understanding. If it takes it 10,000 years, that's fine. If it takes it 1 million years, hey, it has all the time in the universe. I think that's what we're up against. So not only do we have to become more aware, we have to become a lot more aware and understand that there was a vast ancient history in this planet, in this solar system, of inhabited planets with advanced civilizations, and one by one they're being taken down.
Yeah, we see evidence of that on our own planet. We see evidence of it, I believe, on Mars. There is a hidden history to humanity that this deep state, Vatican, City of London, British monarchy, British royals, they don't want us to know about it. They don't want us to know what our connection is.
Well, the moon is covered with ancient ruins.
Oh, I know. And it's stunning information. I find it extremely, extremely uplifting and interesting because there's a hidden history that they don't want us to know about. And the question is, why? You said there's a malevolent force. I want to cite one example of the possibility that there is also a oppositional benevolent force at work. And let me start exploring that real briefly by asking you just one question. And give me a simple answer. Do you think Facebook is a force for good or evil?
Facebook is foul, my friend.
Thank you. Okay. And Mark Zuckerberg is deeply disappointed that his secret Facebook satellite that was being launched by SpaceX blew up back on September 2nd. And it blew up because some little UFO drone, I don't know what, flew by it and appears to have blown it up. I don't know if that was divine intervention. I don't know if it was some oppositional force within the deep state. What I do know is that Mark Zuckerberg's secret Facebook satellite blew up on the SpaceX platform with absolutely no explanation. It's interesting to consider, and I'll just leave it at that.
I don't think it was divine intervention. My perception is that God or the Creator, whatever term you want to use, has endowed us with all the faculties necessary to take care of our own affairs. I suspect, and I've communicated with other people who purport to have seen in visions of various sorts the future possibilities of this planet. And what's coming into focus for me is that, yes, we are in deep trouble. And if we are to be rescued, it will be a self-rescue. There will be no cavalry coming to our assistance. We have every capability, everything we need to rescue ourselves, if we will. It comes down to the desire of the human race. What does humanity desire? Does the human race desire to continue and to be sovereign, self-determining? If so, then we, the human population of this planet, have the unique privilege and duty and capability to rescue ourselves.
Amen. I love it, and I concur. Guys, I think the common belief is that any author who's written several books must certainly have deep pockets. You write books, you make a lot of money. I want you to know that Richard has really taken this plight on for humanity. He's taken the battle on to try to wake people up, and he lives in Ecuador. And, you know, Richard, I don't want to say you've taken a vow of poverty, but you're not a rich man, and if anybody out there listening cares about you and your work, we'd like to help support you. I will put the information on how people can donate to you below in the more information section, and I would just ask people to look in your heart. And, you know, this video will probably get at least 20,000 views, maybe far more than that. If everyone listening gave $1, $5, we could really make an impact on Richard's life. And Richard, I want to thank you very much for your work. Any further comments?
Well, thank you. I very much appreciate that. I would like to say that, yes, as a result of my work and research, I'm a very marginalized individual. We didn't talk about my previous history of anti-nuclear activism, for which I have been arrested multiple times and incarcerated in a dozen different jails, prisons, and detention centers in the United States. You know, having an FBI record causes all kinds of problems and issues as you go through life. And it's true, I have not, though I hold advanced degrees from different universities, I have not had a corporate career or governmental career. So for me, there is no pension. There is no savings. There's no offshore accounts. You know, it's big nowadays to buy property in Panama. You know, store your gold and silver in a secure location in Switzerland or somewhere. I have none of that. Never have had any of it. And when you go up against this machine, so to speak, and you realize early on what you're facing, you cannot have an ordinary life. For me, it began early on. Now there are many people, thousands and thousands, who share many of the same realizations as I, in many cases because of my work. Because I went out front and I took the flak. I went to jail. I wrote the books. Eventually I left the United States and came to South America seeking some answers, and I did find some answers here and continue to find some answers. But it reached a point where I no longer could live in the United States. I just couldn't do it anymore for a whole suite of reasons. Political, economic, legal, social, spiritual, just a whole constellation of reasons that together led me to leave the United States and remain away. I do not intend to return to North America. I intend to remain away. And I would say that, again, I kind of was one of the people in the vanguard. There are more and more people now realizing that the United States is not for them either, and are coming, leaving for a number of other countries, including countries in South America, such as Ecuador. And I would say if anyone listening wants to come to Ecuador, contact me. My email address is on my blog site, eventhorizon.blogspot.com, and I'll put you in touch with people who can help you move in A to Z. I don't do that myself. I'm not set up for it. I don't have the the documents and the proper legal status to do this. But there are people here who do that and are good at it and practiced at it. So if you are listening and you want to get out of the United States or Canada or France or Germany or wherever and come to South America, to Ecuador, contact me and I'll put you in touch with people who can greatly facilitate your move.
Yeah, well, that's very generous. And guys, again, Richard is sort of off the grid to the extent that he doesn't have a bank account. He doesn't have a PayPal account in the traditional sense. So donating money to him is a bit of a challenge. Again, the information will be below in the more info section. And, you know, for, I suppose, the 10% of you that really care enough to try to make an impact on somebody else's life, I think we all care. We're all caring people, but we're busy. I find about 10% of the audience is engaged enough to actually take action. And if you're one of that 10%, I want to thank you in advance. Find a way to send Richard $5, $10, even $1. He even accepts Bitcoin, and that information will be below. You really, truly can make an impact on his life, and on behalf of SGT Report, I'd want to thank you for that in advance. Richard, thanks so much for your time, and for the audience, guys, if we just scratched the surface here, so if there's more you want to hear, if there's directions you wish we had gone, if there's directions you'd like us to go deeper into, please leave us the comments below, and Richard, if you're willing, we'd love to get you back on again in the future.
Well, that'd be fantastic. We could go for hours. There are many things to discuss. I would like to leave you with this parting thought. One of my degrees is in forestry and ecosystem management. We simply must repair the ecosystems on this planet. We have to reforest the planet, and we have to clean the seas so that the marine life can flourish once again. If these vast ecosystems, the great forests and the great marine ecosystems, are not reestablished, this planet is not going to be habitable in any meaningful sense. So it's a huge priority. I don't know exactly how we're going to do it. I only know that we must do it, and we have the capability to do that.
Well, the capability definitely exists technologically, I believe. The question is, do the people have the will to move this government?
That's the issue, and
in
it
the
gets
right
around
direction?
to
Right.
the survivability or the survival instinct of the human race. How bad do you want to live? How bad do you want to rescue your planet? If the answer is you'd rather text message on your iPhone, well, then I guess it's over, isn't it?
Yeah, in that event, it would be.
Now I see people walking around. They even walk out into traffic, crossing, the street, texting. They're in their cars. They're at the traffic light and they're texting. At this point, all over the world, it appears the priority is you got to answer this text message. Not in 5 minutes, not in 5 hours, but right now.
Yeah, well, it's that Pokemon future. It's that transhumanist future. We've seen what happened with the Pokemon test, right? And the CIA organization behind the company that gave that for free. The people are more than happy to behave like sheeple if they get consumed by the technology. And I think that's where they're going to take us. Maybe we should pick it up.
I've known people who, I'm in conversations with them, talking with them, their cell phone buzzes, bzz, bzz, bzz. They abruptly cut off the conversation with me and go to their cell phone. This is quite common.
No, I know. And maybe we should pick up the conversation here the next time, which is the transhumanist future that awaits us should we allow it to unfold. And again, the Pokemon example is just one example of how slippery the slope is into
the machine is spawning.
Yeah, human
machine
beings.
is spawning
No, and they
now.
want, that's right. And they want humanity to merge with the machine. And that really, at the heart of it, describes the beast system that they are steering us toward.
Well, this is the one of the premises of the Terminator movies.
Yeah, Skynet.
It's the premise of the Matrix movies, and of some other sci-fi movies that have come out. This is what we're faced with. I think that we were actually given a download by Hollywood, whether advertently or inadvertently, of the reality, not the future reality. It's being phased in right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I've covered that. Hollywood's predictive programming. That's right. Well, we'll pick up the conversation here next time. And guys, our guest has been Dr. Richard Sauter. Please do visit him at his website, eventhorizon.blogspot.com. Find his email, reach out to him. And a more direct way to do it and to make an impact on his life right now is to go into the more info section and find a way to make a donation to help Richard so he can keep writing these books and doing his research. Richard, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. And guys, if you stuck with us through what has been one of the longest interviews I've ever done, but certainly one of the most gripping, I want to thank you. Thank you for liking it and sharing it with others. And I want to thank you for subscribing if you haven't already done so. Thanks for visiting us at sgtreport.com as well. Real news 24/7. God bless.